The first stage to self-fulfillment is to be proud of who we are right from the beginning. And it's really simple, because if you start with the wrong perspective, you'll make the wrong choice. I'm not out to hurt anyone's feelings, but between politically correct or correct, I'll choose the last. Hello and welcome to the Chris F. Walker Podcast. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending some time with me today. You know, stories are a great tool that we can use to tell other people some of the things we're trying to get them to learn in terms of perspectives, in terms of how application can apply. But a lot of times we get emotionally attached to our circumstances, and we don't often want to be told we might be doing something wrong. So stories are a great way to look at things. And you know what? Today, I want to share another story with you. You see, I love stories. And in fact, you're going to hear me refer back to stories probably throughout the rest of this podcast, because there's a great lesson to be learned when we can stop looking at how we feel about something and start learning at what it is. And it's not that I'm trying to discredit emotions. Emotions matter. But we'll probably talk about that in another episode. The thing I want to get across today is the fact that when it comes to our emotions, how we perceive ourselves through our emotions, we can sometimes convince ourselves of untruths. And those untruths cause misery. They cause pain because they leave us questioning our own identity. And that's just not healthy. So I wanted to share a story today that kind of expresses that. So pull up a nice cup of hot chocolate, get your marshmallows out, snuggle up in your Snuggie. Here we go. Once upon a time. This story is called The Rhino and the Bird. You see, a long time ago, a rhino was walking through the grasslands of the Sahara. He was just minding his own business, and when he looked up in the sky, he sees a bird circling around. The bird is whistling, and he's happy, and he's just loving life, and he's doing, cartwheels in the air. He's just, everything about the bird's exhilaration is something that the rhino is looking at going, dang, look at that. That's pretty cool. And the bird swoops down, lands on the rhino, shakes out his wings, big stretch, and he goes, I just love flying, Mr. Rhino. Don't you? Well, the rhino doesn't really know how to answer that. So finally he just tells the truth and says, I can't fly. The bird is beside himself. His jaw just opens wide and he's just shocked when he says, you can't fly? Oh my gosh. I don't even know what I would do with my life. I mean, the thrill, the freedom, the exhilaration, the breathtaking views, everything about flying is just so amazing. Man, I'm sorry you can't fly, Mr. Rhino. I really am. The bird prepares to take off again, and he looks back with one more wink, and he says, Mr. Rhino, maybe one day you'll fly. And he flies off. And he's whistling, and he's happy, and he's excited again. He goes, I love it up here. It's great. Well, the rhino is sitting there thinking to himself. He looks up and he sees that bird smiling and happy and joyful. Everything about that bird's life just seems awesome. And he says, boy, that bird sure seems to have figured out happiness. I guess that means that the secret to happiness must be flying. So from that point on, the rhino is convinced that if he wants to be happy, he's going to have to learn how to fly. So in order to learn how to fly, he decides to take on a few habits. For example, he starts following the bird and he starts mimicking him. He sees that the bird lives in a nest, so he goes and he builds a nest for himself. He sees the kinds of things that the bird is eating, so he starts eating a lot of that. Of course, in order to be a rhino, he has to eat a lot more. And as he's doing all of this, he's thinking to himself, it's got to happen. The more I learn how to become a bird, the closer I'm going to be to flying, and then I'll be happy. Now, as he's doing this, he has some friends. And some of his rhino friends, they come by and they say, hey, buddy, you're a rhino, right? Not a bird? And he goes, you don't get me. You don't even understand my struggle. You're ignorant. He says, you don't even want me to be happy. You can't even grasp the kind of misery that's on me because I can't fly. Well, some of those rhinos with big hearts say, well, gosh darn it. I mean, I don't want him to be unhappy. I want him to be happy. So they think to themselves and they say, okay, you know what? Maybe what he needs is encouragement. And they say, well, if being able to fly is the only way you're going to be happy, then you know what? You just go ahead and you be the best bird you can be. And he says, you guys are awesome. You're so great. You're in my corner. You understand me. Well, some of his friends decide that they want to help. So they craft a big set of wings out of branches and leaves and twigs. And they give it to him on his birthday. And they say, happy birthday, Mr. Rhino. Here is a big set of wings. Now you look even more like a bird. And the rhino puts it on and goes, oh, I'm looking like a bird. Oh, it's great. But by the end of the day, he's sitting in a corner and he's sad again. And they're going, well, what's the matter? And he says, well, yeah, but I still can't fly. And you see, this kind of lifestyle continues for the rhino until one day he wakes up and he says, I'm so sick and tired of feeling sick and tired. So he goes to the top of the tallest cliff. He thinks to himself, if I just will it into existence, if I think hard enough, if I'm positive enough with my brain waves, I will be able to create flight out of this situation. So he gets a running start. And he hurls himself off the cliff with the kind of speed and momentum that only a charging rhino could have produced. He starts flapping his ears. He's running really fast with his legs, and for just a split second, he's ecstatic as he starts screaming out, I'm flying! And he's suddenly overcome by a different feeling when he realizes that he is not flying. He's falling. And we have to stop at this point and ask ourselves, if I were the rhino, what kind of thoughts would be going through my head before I hit the ground? Please don't forget to follow and review the show today. Also, head over and register at the chrisfwalker.com website. There you'll find links to the Indiegogo and Patreon campaigns, which help keep this show going. You'll also find links to the bookstore, gear shop, blog, and you'll stay up to date on upcoming events and live appearances. Now, let's get back to today's message. Welcome back. So, I know we just shared a story that probably didn't have a very happy ending for most of us. You see, the rhino was convinced that flight was the only way he was going to be happy. And the bird certainly didn't help the situation. I mean, the bird's part of the reason he actually thought that way, isn't he? Bird's sitting there going, man, flight is everything. If you can't fly, you're nothing. Well, how arrogant is that bird to think he knows how everything's supposed to be for everyone? That rhino was never made to be a bird. The rhino was made to be a rhino. And you know, the scary part about this story is if we really think about a lot of the issues that we're struggling with today, they originate from a selfish delusion that something contrary to truth is what is necessary for happiness. And that's a lie. It's just a lie. You see, the rhino was made to be a rhino. And he's probably a pretty good rhino. So let's play around with this a little bit. What if the bird had swooped down and said, whoa, man, Mr. Rhino, what a strong, majestic creature you are. That horn of yours is so noble and refined. 100 of me could land on you and it wouldn't even faze you. Whoa, what a strong rhino you must be. I can't even imagine what it must be like to be a rhino, but I'll bet you're an awesome one. Imagine what that would have done for the rhino's self-esteem. On that same note, though, the reality is The bird's not even needed to talk to the rhino. All the bird has to do is fly around, be happy, and flaunt just a little bit of happiness. Because if the rhino convinces himself that because the bird is happy, flight means happiness, that he will still pursue flight even if the bird's never met him. Bird could be out there whistling and happy. Rhino just looks up and says, dang, it must be flight because of how happy he looks. Well, maybe he's not even all that happy. For all we know, he's out taking a pleasure flight to try and get away from some of the struggles that he's dealing with back at the nest with maybe Mrs. Bird. You see, the reality is we often only see the good that people show us, but we never know the struggles they're going through, and we often convince ourselves that in order to be happy, we have to be like them. We keep trying to mimic other people's happiness, and that's not how it works. The first stage to happiness, the first stage to self-fulfillment is to be proud of who we are right from the beginning. And if you don't know who you are, let me fill you in on this one really easy. You're worth the price paid to purchase you, just like everything else. A car is worth however much money it's worth when it's bought. A piece of jewelry is worth however much money it's worth when it's bought. And if you are questioning how much you're worth, your value, it's not a price tag. It's a priceless gift. Because when Jesus Christ came to this earth and died a sinner's death as he was completely innocent, he paid the ultimate price just for you. You're worth enough that God himself sacrificed his son for you. That's the value of your self-worth. And one of the biggest things we have to remember as we start understanding who we are is that who we are as individuals is something that's powerful and great. Don't get me wrong. Every one of us is capable of wonderful things. But we're also the same people that have made all the mistakes we've made that have led us to where we're at in our life. And if we're not exactly where we wanted to be for our happiness, for our self-fulfillment, for our joy, then there's something that's still missing. And my guess is, unless you have learned that the purpose of being alive is to feel the relationship with the only one who can fill that need, then you're still wondering why, even if you've achieved all the things that are considered success by worldly standards, you're still struggling with your self-worth, with how much joy you can have in your life. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of happiness that can come from things. People say money won't buy you happiness. Well, one of the first things I turn around and I say, well, if you find a $20 bill in your laundry and you didn't know it was there, the emotion that you're feeling is probably not disappointment. Money is happiness because we know what it can do. It can get us things and we like things. So happiness is one thing, but what we truly are seeking, and this is where it becomes a big issue for a lot of people, is that we think we're pursuing happiness, but in reality what we should be pursuing is joy. Joy, contentment, peace are all the kinds of things that come when you have a good personal relationship with the being that you were built to be with. And I don't mean your husband or your wife. I mean God himself. You see, we might have been separated from God because of sin, but when Jesus did what he did, he closed the gap. He made a way that we can actually have a direct relationship. That is where we feel our joy, our contentment. And we know that how we're built is not a mistake. We weren't built by accident. You see, the delusions that we often carry with us about happiness versus joy is that we don't understand the difference. You see, joy is something that's ours. No one can take it from us because it comes from a source that's totally untouchable by the world. The world can give us happiness, that's true. I mean, truth is, whenever my wife does something neat for me, and I get to come home and just experience like she did a birthday party, and I walked in and the whole place was decorated. It was a wonderful feeling. Yes, I'm happy. But my joy does not come from her actions. My joy does not come from my wife. My joy does not even come from me. My joy comes from the relationship I have with Christ. And that is what satisfies people from having to pursue the delusions. Instead, what they say is, oh, I already know how powerful Christ is in me. I know how valuable I am in him. And because of all of that, I don't sit there and say, if I'm a rhino who knows Christ, I don't say, boy, I wish I could pursue flight for happiness. Instead, what I say is, I'm an awesome rhino. God loves me, and I'm already joyful. But you know what would be cool? I think it'd be fun to fly. And as I pursue flight now, I'm not pursuing it from a delusion. I'm pursuing it from a reality. You see, I understand that my joy is not linked to the flight. But what I can do is pursue it. For all we know, this rhino could be the first one that figures out how rhinos can fly. But he'll do it from a healthy perspective because he understands that the world still is the way it is, that he is the way he is, and that even though he's a rhino, he's got the ability to pursue grander goals. But his joy is not hinged on it. His joy is already secured in the price that was paid for him. So when we think about people who are pursuing happiness in their lives, one of the first things we have to do is to try and make sure that we hone them in on, are they trying to pursue something that's going to make them happy, or are they still searching for joy? Because if they're still searching for joy, no matter what they look for in happiness, it will ultimately fail. But if they're joyful first, no matter what they pursue in happiness, they can do it with the right perspective, a healthy imagination, and they can create things that are grandiose. But it doesn't have to suck away your happiness in the process, because your joy, your life-felt joy, is already secure. I realize your time is the most precious commodity you could possibly share with anyone. So I want to thank you again for spending some of yours here with me today. Don't forget to review the message for others. And be sure to follow the Chris F. Walker podcast for new releases. Remember, your generous support on sites like Indiegogo and Patreon are making this show possible. Don't forget to register at the chrisfwalker.com website for links to the bookstore, gear shop, and to stay updated for new events and appearances. I hope to see you again soon. God bless.